And remind you that we are being broadcast live and recorded. We will, if no one objects, what I'd like to do is defer the comments on the minutes until after we've dispensed with the school committee related items so that we don't keep them hanging around. And wish to especially welcome Mr. Stanton here. Are you back to fully back in service?
I am. Thank you.
It's been a rough week at the central office. We're glad they're all here.
Glad to hear you survived in good shape, apparently. All right. Moving item 2, review of warrant articles, the middle school feasibility study.
So if I could start just to sort of frame what we have done. I'm Joanna Boynton, chair of the Concord School Committee, and I live at 72 Chestnut Street. We are in the process of an enormous amount of work as a committee, so I just want to thank all of our support people here today, tonight, for all the work they've done to get ready for this meeting. I just want to say that our committee, in fact, is meeting on next Tuesday for a lot of the conversation around this middle school, the other warrant articles. And so there is a level of work we are in the midst of, but I understand that there were a lot of questions that came from your last meeting, and we're happy to be here and give you a chance to ask some of those, but understand that we have been meeting almost daily, and as Tom mentioned, some people have been very sick, so we're working really hard, and these guys did a tremendous job to put something together to frame our conversation around middle school tonight. And then any other questions we are happy to answer to the extent that we can. But again, we're meeting on Tuesday for a real thorough conversation with our own committee, that some of which we haven't had these conversations with since we haven't met as a regional committee since before the holidays. So with that, Jared and Lori and Ian and Brian, everyone worked very hard, and Heather today, to put together something to start a sort of high-level conversation and on the middle school feasibility articles that we've got before town meeting, and then hopefully answer questions as they come up after these guys present this. Does that sound good?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. So these really are high-level slides that we thought would get the conversation started with a primary focus on the fiscal aspect of this. The work we're doing for Tuesday's meeting with the entire school committee is broader reaching, because there's no conversation about a new school without education in the mix. What we thought you'd be most interested in tonight is some of the fiscal components to a new school and some of the other factors that feed into where we are currently in our status fiscally, and what we project as some of the reasons that it makes sense to do this now. So we just wanted to get you some early facts. Again, the school committee hasn't seen these yet, so we're previewing with you, and we're happy to take questions and comments and refine things and do more research. It's really in the early stages. So we don't need to go through all these details. A lot of you know these schools quite well. Sanborn, you can see some of the highlights there, built in 1964. Various changes over the years, trying to do upgrades at different points. The most noteworthy that still has highly positive impact would be the boilers and water heaters in 2015. Overcrowding needs to be mentioned throughout Sanborn's conversation, throughout the whole conversation. We have 3 mods out in the parking lot with 2 classrooms each because of the overflow of students to accommodate for the overcrowding. Peabody opened in 1970 to address the overcrowding at Sanborn. Originally built as an elementary school is a really important point, because it is an elementary school ad hoc into a middle school, sort of. So we want to stress that it's not suited right from the beginning for a middle school environment. And then you can see the various things that have happened. Those boilers and water heaters were also replaced in 2014. So if we look at some of the broad-based inefficiencies, there are many. A couple of that we'll highlight. Maintaining educational service and equity between the 2 buildings results in a lot of redundancies for us, because we're duplicating staff, we're duplicating utilities, we're duplicating a wide range of different things that we know could be more cost effective in one school. We're estimating that in an early estimate at over $500,000 of annual operating costs. So we want to be sure that number's on your radar. And then if we move just sort of the current status of the buildings and their current physical conditions, I'll talk at high level on a few of these. We do have chronic issues, and we're never sure what the next issue will be. All of the infrastructures, except for the boilers, hot water heaters, and circulation pumps, are beyond their useful lifespan. So that's septic, that's, you name it, it's everything but that. It includes the pipes and such that actually bring the heat from those gorgeous boilers out to the rest of the school. So although that's state of the art and brand new, the system that it supports is not. So we're showing those signs. We've had issues at Sanborn, as you've heard from us earlier this fall, septic, recently a radiator blowing and an inch of water on the floor in a science closet. So we're just never sure what's going to be next. And I think it's important that we outline that there's just risks in multiple directions. And we just keep band-aiding things, trying to get them online for the next short term. So as we shift gears towards more the next part of the process is to talk on how we get from where we are to a new school. And there's no question, although MSBA has not invited us into the process in terms of a fiscal subsidy, we would certainly follow their process in terms of how you go about gathering the information you need, securing the process that you need, and getting to where you'd have design work. So that said, we would be right now, the warrant article is written and it says feasibility study, and we've had some great dialogue and feedback on that set of words, but you can see it is in the process. So really what we're soliciting funding for would be the feasibility study and schematic design. And that is the $1.5 million. That gets you to a place where you have enough of a design that you can present it to the community and ask for the funding to actually build. You then have more detailed design work to do, so you can hire on those folks who are actually going to build. But the schematic design is meant to get you far enough along that there's a presentation at a town meeting that says this is what we think we want in a new school. The costs get outlined to go with it, and then that becomes the next vote of the community as to whether they want to fund the building as designed at the close of that piece. So
can I just stop you for 1 second? So the way this is shown on this slide, the feasibility study is one box and the schematic design is a separate box. Is it the case that the funding that you're requesting would actually satisfy both of those
Correct.
steps?
So it definitely would.
It's really a combination
Yes.
of this study and then actually writing or drawing up a design.
yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's important that we clarify that. Thank you. And you'll see here, we're doing our research on MSBA. I think it's important as a community we gather some data onto the likelihood if we'll apply again in the 2019 round. 70 applications were submitted in 2018. 12 projects were invited to be eligible. If you look at the data we've gathered from 2016, they published data as to who applied a year or two back. In the survey of 2016, 270 schools required moderate to extensive renovation. 131 schools were over 100 years old. Across the Commonwealth, 105 schools are over capacity, and 98, which I'm sure overlaps some of the 105, are using temporary spaces. So we've just been trying to get a sense of the feedback we always get from them is about the level, they're validating the level of need. They've been to the schools and absolutely support that what we've said is the status of the schools is real, but it's always competitive against the other schools that apply and the condition of those schools and how we rate in what they think is priority. So if there's 80, 70, 80 applicants a year and only 12 to 15 are being funded, you can just see that the statistics there can be very challenging to know where you're going to land, knowing that the conditions of the schools across the state mean that list stays pretty flush most of the time. So we're just presenting that as fact. I think we're questioning whether a third time actually going to be beneficial. We start to think not, which is why we want to be sure we're having the conversation now. We're also bringing forward to you projected cost growth, which we think is equally as important for the community to hear this. From 2010 to 2016, MSBA-funded projects averaged almost 7% increase every year. We know that that's escalated further with some of the steel costs and such since 2016. If the trends continue, the cost of waiting continues to increase substantially just because the cost of building goes up. So depending on how you do the numbers, you can come up with millions that it costs to wait because of the cost increases and the operating costs that we are right now putting out. So we just want to be sure that it's clear that we think there's money lost in waiting. We also know that MSBA funding will be on the smaller level if and when we were ever to get in because of their restrictions on the middle school projects. They would not build an auditorium. We'd have another battle with them over the size of a gym, just like we did at the high school. There would be some things that most likely this community would be hoping for that would not be subsidized.
So an MSBA model school does not include an auditorium?
At the middle school level, no. Yeah.
Lori, I had a question. On the 12 schools that were funded this year, or were approved this year, did they look like the 100-year-old overcapacity?
Some of them did, yeah. There's a range. There's definitely a range. Brookline had a 100-year-old school in the mix. Some of the others were more of our vintage, so what pops them up, it's hard to say.
It's not like the next 10 years are going to be filling the 100-year-old schools and boxes out everywhere. So some sneak in.
Some get through.
Yeah,
Some get through.
Just another MSBA question. Does MSBA usually cover the cost of feasibility studies?
Yes.
Or is that they do?
They do. They definitely do. The next graph does some of that same conceptual work in terms of cost growth over time. Do you want to speak to this a little more, or Ian?
Not that Ian, because the number of colors are...
Jared's been homesick all week, so Ian's going to talk to this one.
So this was put together by the MSBA recently, and it has a trend line, a red trend line, showing project costs through 2016. And each marker on there is a data point, and you can see they've extrapolated into the future based on projects that they're working on right now. And every year, projects that they're in the preliminary stages of funding, you can see the trend for those data points is clearly going up at a rate that might even be quicker than it's been through 2016. So all those blue and purple lines are various projects in the early stage of being approved by MSBA. But you can see the trend line, when they do extrapolate it out, is probably going to continue. And that 7% increase it looks like it continues through 2020.
We need a good recession.
Or faster. And the trend lines on the bottom, you can see a green line there, and that's the MSBA maximum square footage funding rate. So it hasn't even been keeping up over time with the actual project costs.
Have you already, or could you, if you haven't, put these slides online, make them available online?
Yes, they are not yet.
I personally, this is not going to do me any good at home unless I get out my magnifying glass. And they're not even, some of it's not as easy to read up there. So
our hope, Tom, is that this is the beginning of what would be a presentation we'll provide for everyone online, at coffees, at forum. Like, this is the work that we're doing right now to hopefully then have it accessible to whoever wants to access it. But it's just not finished yet until next Tuesday, probably.
On the data points for 2021, are those based on projects and cost estimates of projects that are going to be built at that time?
Yeah, those are upcoming approved budgets for projects.
Approved budgets.
Yeah.
So are we comparing different projects over time, or is it the same project gets bigger every year? I'm trying to understand the comparison.
Those are actual projects that are happening right now. So.
Right. But are they different? Like, one project is a big project, one project is a small project?
But yes, but those are the square footage costs.
Oh,
So
okay.
there'll be
Those are
yeah.
a rate. Okay.
Sorry, yeah.
Based on bids?
Yeah.
Yeah, square footage.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. That's a very, that's
So I mean, I don't know if this is part of Christine's question, but is every square we're seeing up there, regardless of its color, a different project?
Yes.
Or are,
Yes.
so it,
Yeah, the colors represent different phases. So orange, actually, I believe at this point is the project is done or very close to done. And then as you go out, I believe the blue is designs that they're currently working with. And then it's kind of hard to see all the colors, but if you, and when we have it online too, it'll have the index that shows what each phase of the projects are.
But these are actual projects that are in the queue or have been, so they've been completed to different levels of finish, but in projection of the square foot price at the completion of those projects.
And what is the rate of growth in the line?
So through 2016, it's close to 7%. It's the 6.93 number.
I'm sorry, can I go back to an MSBA question?
Sure.
If you go ahead next year and you are granted some money, would you have to redo the feasibility study?
We would. So if you are invited in, the feasibility work and the design work that we do now would not be applicable because MSBA requires a clean start. So there is a risk factor there. We're definitely going to acknowledge that.
so this is a statement I've heard many times, and it always raises the same questions for me. Does that mean that you have to throw out everything you've done, get a new?
When I asked him, SBA, that question, the answer was it can certainly help inform the project, but they need to be part of the project management acquisition that happens at the beginning. And so you can't utilize those per se without the formal bid process and all of that starting over again. So it could be. I think we sit here pretty confident that we don't think we have great chances to be invited in a third year. We would not be proposing this if we thought that. That's why we waited two, to just get a feel for that.
The other thing to the point about the study, if we do it, we have a lot more flexibility around what the needs, how we want the school to meet the needs of our student body and families, for example, an auditorium, or those kinds of things, and how MSBA restricts what you can do. Part of the reason you wouldn't be able to use is there's probably things in your feasibilities, ours, as what Concord might come up with that would be different from what's eligible for reimbursement, and how they do their formulas for what's allowable in a school. For example, school population, how many guidance counselor offices you have. I think we had this at the high school. Their ratio is a lot higher, student per number of students per guidance counselor. So that determines it. It would be. I'm making this up. So it's 6 offices, and we actually need 9. So, in need, in what we believe that we need to provide for our kids. So, there's a lot. There's an ability to serve, with the educators in Concord and the families, a real opportunity to also find ways to meet the educational goals and needs.
Is this more nuanced than binary? Is it something like, if we want an auditorium, we can just pay for it and have an auditorium, and all the rest of the process still continues?
Well, that's an excellent question. I only have the high school to go with, which was pretty restricted. Even though we wanted a second gym, it's still way undersized from what we would have liked, and it wasn't allowed to be attached to the building.
But we paid, as a pair of communities, we paid for that separate gymnasium. Correct. Because we wanted a 2-gym athletic program.
Correct, but
So
it wasn't.
There was a way to do it.
It was very hard.
It was very hard.
And if it's connected, they wouldn't let us do it. So we had to be able to delineate between that building and the other building, and it took a lot of arm twisting. They generally don't allow that.
There were other components, like I think the TV studio, which was to help with our PEG stuff. It was that, and the community had offices. Or there were pieces of that building that we had to fight for, but I think we got some of that stuff done. So my recollection is that you're right, it's hard, but I don't think it's completely binary. We can get stuff done if we need to.
looking at that chart, it seems like there's two, well, one is it certainly drives the project overall, right? And it seems like there could be two conclusions. One is, oh my goodness, let's hurry up and build quickly because every year we wait, it's going to cost us X% more. The other conclusion could be it's a bad time to build, right? That, you know, you have tariffs and you have 3% unemployment rate, and that, you know, I joked before about recession, but, you know, depends what goes on, right? You're now taking a betting game, but 5 years from now, it may not be different, it may not be the same, right? So I think looking at it, it argues hurry up and chase it, but you can certainly make the other argument that 5 years from now, the next, you know, 2008, 2009 recession you have is an outstanding time to build, right? Not that I'm rooting for it, but in terms of how you save money relative to the project. So,
yeah, so the factor you have to consider is the needs of those schools.
Yeah,
I don't think you have 5 years before there's some major infrastructure need that we're going to have to pull the trigger on, which to me feels like such a money pit.
I was just saying that it's not that going today is going to save money over some point in the future, right? Disconnecting.
No crystal ball, right?
So a question that's a corollary to Scott's statement. If it's clear that the community is supportive of a new middle school on the most expeditious schedule, when would we anticipate that we would actually have children in the new school?
I think we're saying 4 years. There's always room for that to be shorter or a little longer, but
really
4 is
construction
probably
starts.
better.
Well, I know, but construction would begin
Probably a year and a half to
years.
2 years.
Okay.
That is if we were to move forward from this point, funding it as a town, and, you know, we get this approval.
Right.
I mean, some of the other benefits, I mean, silver lining sort of, but you do have an opportunity to control that timeline a little better, and the efficiencies, you know, it's very rigid, the MSBA. So it's possible we could build faster and presumably more cost effectively if we were doing it on our own, just by virtue of the time.
One layer of bureaucracy not to work through.
One of the things that I would like to see, and Carrie, maybe this is something you could work on, is the slide where it shows the debt service declining. I would love to.
Why don't we just call up that next slide?
Yeah, we have a little bit of that.
Oh, am I jumping ahead? Sorry.
It's almost like we asked you to do that. So we're gathering all that information. This chart reflects the decline. The next slide shows when the elementary schools and high school roll off, the elementary schools being the most important. Go ahead. We'll flip back and forth. So Alcott rolls off in 25, Thoreau in 26, Willard in 29, and the high school in 38. All of those are declining between now and then, which is why that graph looks like it does. And all we can report to is the school building debt. The town, we've had conversations with Carrie, and we have some of those big picture numbers, but that's information that she also feeds for you. So really, you know, our points tonight, and again, these are the 30,000-foot viewpoints. We have a lot of others that we're building also that highlight the whys we need a school, and we'll definitely be happy to give you that full suite of slides as we finish it and construct them. But really, tonight we just want to make the points that we do think there's savings to do it now, even without MSBA, given the unpredictable natures of it. And we think the need is now. There probably isn't a day we don't stand in those schools feeling on borrowed time. And at some point, and I don't know when that is, because I don't feel like it's ever going to be the right recommendation from this seat to say we need to replace some major infrastructure in either school. I don't think that's fiscally prudent ever. But there will be a point if that's the facility we have to use, the only way to keep kids in there is to do that. So we don't want to sit here and say we know exactly when that is. We just cross our fingers and hope it isn't tomorrow or next year. But to think 5 years out, it won't start to be a discussion is, I think, quite unrealistic. So.
What was your estimate, just ballpark, to get your 5 to 15 million? What was your
You guys want to talk?
ballpark guess on actual cost of the school?
Sure.
So, pardon my voice. So the 5 million is, we're expecting about 548,000 in yearly savings through the redundancies.
Yeah.
And using a 3% cost escalation, that would get you about 5 million. And then the 15 million is using a 6.93% number, as well as the 548 per year.
Say that again.
I'm lost.
Slow down and do it.
Yeah.
What's the cost of the treatment?
All right, go through it again.
Yeah. So right now we use sort of cost escalation of between say 3% and 7%. If we went with the 3%, the redundancies are about $548,000 per year.
Yeah.
With a 3% increase, it will be roughly about 5 million.
Over 2 years.
Over 2 years, the savings.
That's fine, I just,
So
it's 500 grand a year, let's round it, 500, in 2 years, that's $1 million. How do you get to 5 million?
So the 5 million would be so say we're using say the project cost 90 million.
That's my question.
That was the
That was the number you needed. I was waiting for it.
My apologies.
So $1 million is operating costs, savings, okay, and the other 4 to 14 million is 7%.
Correct. With the
7% growth, so it's 7 million and another 7 ballpark,
Yeah.
right? 7 million, 6
7.5
million, whatever it is, I just ballpark.
So it's 90 million, how many square feet?
So do not.
Yeah.
I just want to ballpark.
We
It's just
really
back down
don't
a little.
know.
Yeah.
It's back down.
Okay, I know.
People not. So
Yeah.
I'm just trying to.
We are
We're not ready
literally
to say.
accumulating
No.
all this information as we speak. So we had a meeting today, we have another one
Just
tomorrow.
ballpark, that's, yeah.
Sure. And
Okay, school committee says.
Whenever it goes like this with their pen, I'm like,
Yeah, we do.
There was a study of needs done that.
2 years
Yes.
ago.
2 years ago.
Correct.
I mean, we're pretty much talking about the same.
Definitely.
So there was a square footage that was developed.
Oh, on the Feingold?
Yeah.
Do you have that?
So, Jared, just so I can be
It's so
clear,
rough, Carl, I don't think we'd even want to be held to it. Like, we don't even know what it is. 'Cause we're
what is the meaning of
not
the
sure that that's where we
548
would land or not.
Operating
Savings.
savings per year by redundancy.
By not having two buildings.
Redundant rank buildings. That's OpEx.
Most of that's utilities and some staff
Sooner.
that you could
Save
consult.
that much money.
Yes.
Doing it sooner avoids the cost increase.
If you can solve it.
Well, and if you think of
With no-
not only two buildings that are incredibly inefficient, right, in their utility, the running of them are very costly. Obviously, there's redundancies in staff, but anytime that there's a new program, for example, this 3D printer or new maker space, I think they have to do two to be equal for all the kids, in the program. So, it kind of programmatically, operationally, it's a real.
Well, what's interesting is
Cost.
all that gets dwarfed by, so your OpEx gets dwarfed by your CapEx, and your assumption about rate of increase of construction costs,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Other stuff's irrelevant.
Yes.
You could buy, STEM labs, once a year forever and not pay for the $9 million, for the $7 million. So it really is a bet on, you're betting, you're implicitly assuming, I'd say, that the construction costs are going to keep increasing at that rate, therefore hurry up and chase it, right? The same would have been said, just for devil's advocate, in 2007 before the crash, right? And presumably, if you looked at a chart in 2007, all the stuff was taken off at the same rate, and then lo and behold, it's 50% lower in 3 years, right? I just want to put that out there, so because you're trying to time the market in some way. Actually, you're not really trying to time the market. You're assuming that you're assuming it's going to keep going up, and all I'm just raising the question is, maybe or maybe not, right?
And the commodity prices don't only go up, they fluctuate down.
Yeah, then you get tariffs and you got 3% unemployment rate, and
The bid prices are very high because everybody's busy. With their increase in capacity is going to bring bid prices down.
Well, that would also hope that if that were to happen, then the savings in the building coincides with that.
but it gets dwarfed by your CapEx.
And I think some of those risks are so offset by the jeopardy you're in right now in those two schools for what could go wrong at any point.
Have you quantified that at all?
Well, so the Feingold report, the architects who worked over the last few years, and Heather's got it there, they came out and did assessments of the infrastructure and the needs that would come. So what they outlined very clearly was if we're going to remain in those schools, there are
think
big
10 years.
infrastructure, millions and millions of dollars of work to be done to be able to stay. Now, we haven't done those pieces because we don't think it's the right fiscal decision to start asking for those things.
Right.
But at some point, you have no choice because they're going to fail.
Did they say whether the school should be rebuilt or should be fixed?
Rebuilt.
So Feingold said it should be rebuilt.
We need a new school.
A single.
It's one new school.
What are the big risk factors? they say?
Septic is huge.
So we had a septic backup
Yep.
on a Friday afternoon a few weeks ago.
We've had a couple of them.
And had to move, several classrooms offline. Kids couldn't get to their lockers. Like, it was coming up. The drains are in the floor. The remedy to that has been some work that was quoted at $5,000, and
It's now
now
almost
it's-
20.
They get in there and it's corroded pipe, and it's we don't have to go into the details of this one, but it's very real and tenuous. The other one being the radiator that up in the night, it burst and leaked water on.
But once you're in those radiators, everything in there is so corroded, you're surprised it hasn't happened before. So we took what we got access to that day and went, oh my goodness, this whole building's full of that.
And some of it's so old that you can't get parts to
Oh,
repair some of the stuff that we've talked
Mechanical
about.
equipment.
Homes are buried in cement, so if there are issues, you can't get to them.
Yep, some of the piping is buried in the cement. It's they're old. They're really old, and it's very hard to predict exactly. The roofs are in their 15th or so year, and they're 20-year roofs. Roughly.
Some of them are 20.
Some of them are
Some
20.
older, so.
And those are roofs that, again, you can't. You do roofs differently now. The material's different, and isn't it?
It's
Or not.
a similar material, but it's better now
Okay.
with Sonophil materials. Yeah.
So, those are a few off the top of my head, but.
You're probably aware that, based on a recommendation by the Finance Committee, that the Select Board is considering appointing a permanent building committee.
Yeah.
How would that interact with the school committee for this project?
Well, I actually talked to Phil today about that. There's some process still happening in terms of actually establishing that. And then my understanding is there's also still some study being done to establish sort of what the needs are for the town. I can't answer it directly because it's all in the timing of when that might be established. But should we go ahead with this project, this is a town project. In the end, it's run similarly to that idea. It's not a permanent standing group, but the select board or the town manager collectively, would create a building committee and would run the project. So in fact, it's not too dissimilar, but it's only been, I guess, discussed at the select board level. So I imagine you could use such a committee or board because it's also run by the town.
So following up on Mary's question and going back to the slide called the MSBA building process, they ask you to be invited in, you get invited, and then they have the next box is forming the project team. If this is a town project, shouldn't the project team be part of like the town manager, select board, and they're the ones who are engaged in this feasibility process? I mean, right now you're coming to us as a school committee saying we want to do this feasibility thing, but the MSBA building process says form your project team, then go get your feasibility project done. But what's the project team?
So the actual building committee is formed when the feasibility and schematic design are funded, typically in the process. So that all's fairly simultaneous. Many communities don't have much to talk about until that phase happens, because that's when all the work begins. In this case, it is a town committee. You're gonna, one or two school committee members will be appointed to the committee. Hopefully you'll invite me too. And it's an offshoot of the town. All of the decision-making lies there. Certainly the school committee is gonna wanna have input to that and be part of that conversation, but it is a town committee. So we would most definitely recommend, especially if anything is funded, that happen immediately. If not sooner. I don't think we were ready to ask for it sooner, not knowing if there's more to talk about, but we'd be open to that for sure.
I love that phrase, immediately if not sooner.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just feels like the way this box, I mean, if you look at this, it's a shared responsibility. Blue is districts, and green is construction professionals. So you need construction professionals and district
So part of that
oversight
project team
is that project team. And that seems
and a
like it comes
professional
before the
project
feasibility
manager.
study.
Well, eligibility
That's what the
period
project
comes
is.
before that, and we just learned we weren't eligible. So I think
So
we could say, form a town committee now.
But I want to clarify,
But
when they say project team, it's a professional project team. You're hiring your
Right.
project manager.
Yep.
All the committee piece sits aside of that. You're hiring a professional who's going to lead the feasibility and schematic design work on behalf of the district or the town, whoever's responsible for the building project. So when they say project team, they're looking for those professionals. That obviously should and would need to be complementary to the committee process.
But aren't the professionals being driven by what the community wants?
Of course, but you're going to pay someone to run, and Jared, you can hop in here at any point, having done this too. There's always an owner's project manager who oversees and works for the district or the community. You certainly have one on the high school and elementary projects for each of those projects. Their job is to work for the town.
So this forming the team isn't necessarily building the building committee right now. It's professionals. It's to do the feasibility study, schematic design, you need an OPM. The OPM cost is about anywhere from about $300,000, and we're estimating, and then the schematic design feasibility study is about 1.2 million. So to get that going, OPM needs that, and then it's the building committee.
So you need funding approval in order to form that up.
Yes.
You can't go into the feasibility study box without funding, and you can't really form that up because some of the professionals require funding just to get that
That's right.
project team assembled.
Yeah.
I'm starting to understand.
So presumably when the OPM brought on, the building committee will be there simultaneously.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All that becomes an ebb and
Yeah.
flow of how the feedback gets to the design of the school.
Because there's a big process for all that, and that would be the building committees simultaneously working through that as well for the team.
The only other thing I thought would be helpful is on your town fiscal factor, the chart shows declining debt service. It'd be interesting to have a straw man, 90 million, pick your number, $90 million project, what that would look like.
Yeah.
And then as a separate line and then add them together, right? Because that's the true impact of all the debt service, right? And again, whether it's 90 or 100 or 80, it doesn't matter, but just that way it's the magnitude that shows, oh, how is, what are we talking about relative to what else is going on? Thank you.
Any other questions? I think at this point, any citizen questions or comments before we move on to the next warrant article? Okay, hearing none. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
So, for CCRSD.
Do you want to?
Oh, the Gale presentation, can you cue that up?
Sure. Well, it's up to you.
No, it's all right.
You're prepared. You want to do it?
No, that's fine. You know as much as I do.
Okay. So I think do you have the Gale?
They have the packet.
The Gale packet. Okay, so again, the capital article we have before the town, we are doing a tremendous amount of work that we haven't met as a region to discuss this as a committee. The work we are doing is to start to prepare how to present what we are asking for, which includes the roadway work to pave the roadway, fix the curbing, the sidewalks, the drainage, and include a parking lot. We had Gail do a study only in that we had a campus advisory committee talk about all the things that might be needs and wants on the campus. We hired Gail to go and see if all those things, the ones that had really risen to the top in discussion, could even fit, and what that would look like. A lot of that was a discussion around impervious surface, which is the driving force of what we can get permitted on that campus at all, because it's entirely in a groundwater conservancy district. The state allows by right 15% coverage. The current coverage is roughly 20%. The old high school was at,
Like 19,
or 19%.
something like
I have this all on my computer, but I'm not computer friend. And the proposal from Gail was sort of just to find out rough costs, as much as they could get estimates, and also what the coverage would add, how it would add to that impervious surface coverage. The school committee has very quickly sidelined a lot of those options that you're looking at in this report for various reasons, most predominantly cost and impervious surface, and have decided in their conversations to include the access road construction and the building of the parking lot. The track is sidelined primarily until we have private funding in all likelihood. And the amenities building is going to take some time to work through the state plumbing code and some other things. So that was a little less likely that we would be ready to do anything there for probably another year or so. So that kind of gets you to the most important things that the school committee has decided need to be addressed. And that is what is in the warrant article.
So these on the list of costs are item 1 and
4A.
4A?
Yeah.
Okay.
Correct. And again, I would say conservative estimates so that we don't find ourselves short, but we hope and anticipate that doing these two things together would prove to be a lot more cost-effective and efficient, because it's the same mobilization and equipment and process of building and asphalt and drainage and these kinds of things that we'll be doing for both projects would ideally be the same contractor, and therefore, as a merged project, would show some efficiencies.
You covered most of it. I think you've probably seen now that the roadway reconstruction, which truly should have happened as part of the building project, I think I would say pretty confidently. Estimated costs now are at $1.2 million to get that roadway to what it needs to be. I think that we can pretty confidently say there's just a safety issue there. We're patching potholes all the time and things like that. It needs to be addressed. Parking, 4A, you'll see there's a proposed parking lot up. We'll use the landfill where the track is really sitting up towards the school from where the landfill space is. And we're proposing 104 spots there right now. The parking needs have not stopped truly since the building opened. We've been doing homework on this to really review the history. We today resurrected a PowerPoint from November of 2015 on this topic with all of the projected problems that were going to play out if the parking wasn't addressed, and it's kind of eerily cryptic to exactly what we've been living, that it's just become this chronic stress on the school. We're going to advocate for the kids most of all. We're happy to talk on some of what leads to the need for parking for students. It's complex and it's not straightforward. We know there are other options, and buses and things just don't fit all of their lives in 2019 when they're working and on sports. Some of the richness of our school is all the 85% of them that participate in extracurriculars are better, and to think all of that fits on a school bus schedule, even with late buses, just is not realistic. So the ongoing stress that it has brought to the kids is of great concern. We've tried a whole bunch of things. We're using parking that hadn't been used before. We've moved the teachers up to the top, up by Memorial, up to the Doug Whitefield spaces. We've numbered the spots. We've rented from BD, which didn't make us great neighbors for a while. We've tried all sorts of things. The one thing we eliminated this year was the first come, first serve option along the BD Road. What that led to was kids getting there earlier and earlier in the morning to get a spot, which was negating the entire impact of the late start time that we had put in. So we numbered those this year, and we just told the juniors that there was no parking, so the seniors are the only ones with parking spaces. That created quite a bunch of feedback for us in September as that rolled out, and now it's created somewhat of a black market as the seniors make their spaces available for cost to the juniors. So we try to intervene, as we know that visitors cannot park there. That would include those of us sitting at the table when we try to go over. It's just one ongoing discussion that just doesn't let up. And whether it's the kids and their stress, or it's the families complaining to us, or it's some poor person just trying to go ahead and do a piece of business, and then there's no place to park, and then they try to figure out what to do next, and they know the numbers mean they shouldn't go there and where they're supposed to go, and it needs to get addressed. Will it fix everything? No. All the juniors are not going to get a spot, and that is okay. We're going to figure out how to manage that. The answer is this is the last option on that campus. These 100 spots go in. That's the end of it. We need to make a plan, and as a community figure out how to make it work. But we've got to get the edge off. At least we feel like we had to propose a way to get the edge off and make this a more tenable situation for the kids and the staff and the families that this serves. There will be community benefits, town meeting and such. We run out of parking there. You're shuttling kids from Alcott a lot of the time. It's a really important meeting. There are going to be times when we can definitely benefit as a community. So,
Hunter, how many juniors will still not have spots?
So typically it's about 220 kids who are looking for parking, but that takes the whole year for them to get their licenses and such. So there'll probably be about half of that, or a little greater, that may still wish they had spaces. Right now they're all over town. They're on Laurel Street. They're everywhere. So those options will still be there as they get their licenses. I think a clear message of we've done everything we can is a pretty important part of how we're going to figure this out going forward. And it really peaked, if it's not all the juniors, it'll peak in the spring as the last groups get their licenses. So I think we can manage our way through that for that short window every year where it's at a peak challenge.
So two questions come to my mind. After this quantum of parking is installed, is there any room left for parking?
No.
And are you therefore reasonably certain that you won't be back to us in
We won't
3
be
or
back.
4 years?
We're not even 100% assured this will be permitted because we will need NRC to allow for the special permit on the impervious surface back to the 22% that was there with the old high school. None of us expect they would grant beyond that, for one. And two, the site has no space left that isn't wetland or field, and it's the end of the discussion. Under my tenure, I don't know after me. I won't speak for the person after me who says, I can't believe she agreed to that, but.
If you increase the number of parking spaces, would there be a decreased need for buses?
I'd love to say yes and help that be a wash for you fiscally. It wouldn't be at this point. We have to bus and allow for all the kids to have a space. Other districts have tried to get commitments that we're going to give up our spots, and it's very challenging. Some emergency happens and kids have to go home in the middle of a school day. You have to know who can get on what bus. So it isn't a one-for-one. We are highly reimbursed by the state at the regional level for transportation. So we are well supported in the busing at this point. So we also wouldn't want to risk anything to jeopardize that. What's the rate right now?
72 right now.
72% of your regional transportation is subsidized by the state.
So if you put in this additional lot, what percentage of the increased spaces would then be carved out so administratively you can go over and visit? Or
I know.
I'm serious. I mean, we're so stressed now. No juniors have a space. You guys can't even park. You couldn't have a little conference where you bring teachers in from different places and have them get together because there's no place for anybody to park. How much of this will then be carved away and just reserved for visitors?
I thought you had a parking space in the back. I remember I parked there today.
Does it say
superintendent? No, it doesn't.
It definitely doesn't, Mary.
It's in principle, sorry.
Yes, the building administrators have spots. I do not. I do not. No, and I don't think we're sure of that number yet. I think 15 to 20 is going to have to be a serious consideration just to make sure that everybody who needs to come and go from the school can do so effectively. And, you know, I don't think those visitor spots are going to be down in this lot. They're going to be up on the roadway by the front door just to make that work. But we've got to get the edge off. Can we host anything during the school day? We can't even usually park the college recruiters who are in trying to get to our kids. So it really, just everything's complicated. So, no, I park up at the top lot with the teachers and walk in the rain. And yeah.
Are we required by law that the full complement of buses runs at dismissal? If 85% of kids need a ride home at the end of the extracurricular day, why don't we have the big bus run happen then and let the 15% run on a more skeletal late bus like type of route and have the buses actually run when the kids need them?
I don't think it's that static. I've talked with other districts and been in one that tried to really get a handle on how we could figure that out, because it wasn't a regional district and it was motivating to try to minimize the buses. Their schedules change so much, and it's not like every sports team that ends at exactly the same time, and some kids are going certain places on Wednesday and not on Tuesday. We couldn't pin it down, and there wasn't a group of parents willing to sign off and say, I'm just giving up bus service for the year. They're very minimal of that. So we'd have to keep talking on how to get that data and how to see if there was any option there.
One of the things that we've done, Lori has formed a committee, sustainability committee, that includes teachers and kids, students and families and administrators, to take on actually this conversation as one of their first items, and start to address what is all these things, like what are all the needs and how can we do a better job transporting and being a little more sustainable in our approach to them. But, you point out like the winter shared gym times for all teams are different, and throughout into the night, ice hockey teams travel to another space.
Having had a child do sports at the high school, I understand that the schedule is always shifting, but if you have a bigger percentage able to go home on a bus, as opposed to 85% saying the bus never works, that would take pressure off.
Sure.
And as a parent and a citizen, there's a disconnect between the passion for the environment and the willing of an individual child or family to be inconvenienced, and that we fund professionals to look at green things, and we are happy with our LEED buildings, but there's a little bit of a collective unwillingness to sacrifice. Like, it's great if there's going to be more spots at the high school for town meeting, but it's responsible to use swing capacity over at Elcott that's, a very short bus ride away for a couple nights a year, and that kind of all of us being willing to compromise matters.
So Kate Hanley's going to be on this committee, and I was in this room probably 2 months ago with a number of different representatives from across committees across town, and the whole work Kate had us doing that day was the behavioral change needed for some of these sustainability pieces, and she had all of this research I had never seen about it. It put to paper the pain of what we're living. Like, why can't they just do this? Well, there's actually the research out there that says the ideal, we wish the environment was this, but that change of your own personal life and the choices you make to get to that can really lag behind. So that's why this group's going to start to talk about it. The kids are going to be in the discussion as well as a number of other community groups in town. I think there's a place we can definitely start to have the conversation. I think it's a slow conversation. That's the challenge.
And then down the road, if we're doing 4A and 104 space lot, does that mean that then we're taking the field house options off the table? If I'm looking at this, it looks like the 80 spots tied to a field house project, and then if we commit to 104 spaces, we're saying track.
No, I think the 80 actually is tied to an 8-lane track. It gets wider. I'm pretty sure. But again, the two parking lots don't preclude another, is that right?
It's actually the 6-lane track with the
8-lane straightaway. It was really, I think, the size of the track and the radius of the track that affected the parking. The goal was to not preclude anything that people had talked about on this list when we made a choice.
The way this is laid out, it looks like 6 is option B, 7 is option C, and that your parking lot is, that you're looking at is for A and the 4D is for B and C.
Oh, I see, yeah,
So it may just be
yeah.
a labeling issue.
Yeah, and that was because Gail grouped them in a way that they thought they understood as priorities and options.
So the 104 is not.
So if we build that 104, the design they had for what could be a field house would have to shift some because it would overlap a little bit. As a committee, there's been no determination about going firmly to a track or a field house or any of those big ticket items that I don't see us coming to ask for funding for.
So since we're still talking about parking, I do have a question about the loop road. I'll get back to that.
Sure.
Since we're still talking about parking, the one thing that we're wrestling with is that juniors and seniors have this parking demand. What do freshmen and sophomores do who have all this extracurricular work that they're involved in?
They're in the line of cars of parents picking them up and dropping them
But those
off.
parents can't pick kids up.
Well, there's always a hope for a relief valve in a family who's driving kids in multiple directions, so there is a piece of that for sure.
I mean, it somehow it's solved, and then the family just decides this is a much easier solution for me. I don't have to swing by and pick up my child, so I'm just going to buy them a car. And we are, as a town, eating that.
Well, I think
So
I think you have to remember too, kids age into being eligible for work at 15, so they're not all working as freshmen. I think things change as they get older, but I won't argue with you. I suppose there's some truth to that.
Yeah.
I'm not going to change all these families' behaviors.
No,
We're going to try to really
work
to begin that conversation. But
This is, I'm just, somehow we're solving it through the point where the child literally cannot drive, but then when they can drive, now we have a problem. So
I hope at some point we'll get a chance for the families to share some of their individual stories, because I know we've been very moved by the individual stress of hearing how these different scenarios play out for them. And those are the folks we're here to advocate for. So.
Okay. So now
I won't bore you with my personal stress about it. But
I don't think too many of the questions that we've asked around this parking have that much to do with the financial aspects. So I do want to get to the financial aspects of the loop road. $1.2 million, this thing is maybe a half mile, if that. I'm not sure that Gail gave you all the options that were possible here. I think it would be helpful to run this under the nose of Public Works. Phil Swayman, who was here at our last meeting, made that comment, and I'm going to credit him because he's the one who put it out there. The way this has been done, it's literally strip everything off, take all the asphalt and drive it away, put fresh gravel and build a whole new road.
Right.
And there are a lot of other ways to fix roads that probably ought to be looked at before we decide we're going to spend $1.2 million. So I just commend you to the Public Works Department to have them eyeball it and give you their grading system and how they would approach it.
certainly.
Did Gail do borings to find out what the condition of the sub?
Brian,
No, they did not.
They did not.
They did physical observations. We had large potholes there. They could actually see what was happening beneath the surface, but they didn't do borings.
Well, it's funny because we're repaving Concord Green where I live, and and that was it's a large project. And what we did is we brought in a contractor to do some borings, so we could find out exactly what the subsurface was like. So sometimes you could just do a coat, sometimes you have to go down quite deep.
Right.
But the only way to really know is to do borings.
So what they're asking, this is the feasibility study. This would be the first step. We would ask for the money. They would come in. We'd have a design. They would do borings before they did a final design to make sure. So these are estimates based on what they feel are needed there. It's a feasibility study. They would come in as...
I see borings listed though. I see repair subbase, place process gravel at 4 inches, then a 2.5-inch binder course and a 1.5-inch top. Those are things that...
Yeah, that'd be
This
part
is
of
the
it.
quote.
The borings would be part of the design work.
Right, so-
No, those are expensive. There's 205,000, 240. Those are actually putting them. That's
Yeah, that's
doing the
doing
work.
very deep.
Yeah, that's doing the work.
I guess I'm wondering where in this list with the borings are the borings?
when we go for a design, they would come in, they would do the borings and see exactly what is needed. The feasibility study wasn't that in-depth. It was a cost estimate for what they would come in and look at.
So is it safe to say this is the high end?
Yes.
Yes, it is a conservative, yes.
So they're going to do borings before we do anything.
Right.
As part of the actual design of what's going to truly happen there once we work with the vendor.
Can I just
That's
clarify
gonna
one thing?
design
Is these 10% soft cost, is that design cost?
Yes.
So we're, in that trick where we need to get a number in the article that we feel can do the job, but we don't have all the details figured out. The absolute determination, this is the high
If you
end.
rebuild the road, this money would cover it.
Right.
Yes.
That's right.
Yeah.
So
This
there's
includes lighting.
potentially better outcomes.
There are
Yes.
better outcomes possible.
Right.
Definitely.
Absolutely. And this
Ideal.
also includes lighting along the full roadway,
Yeah.
all brand new
Yeah.
lighting. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine.
Jen, from an accounting standpoint, let's say we get lucky and the borings show that we can do a mill and, what do they call it?
Frosting.
If there's money left over from this, what happens to it? Does it go back into the general fund or?
I can speak to that. So we would only borrow, we would do a temporary borrowing for the full amount, and then we would only permanently borrow over the long term,
I see.
whether a 10-year bond or whatever, for
Okay.
the actual project costs.
Okay,
So,
good. On 4A, did Phil have some questions?
He did,
on-
except his numbers are, I guess, based on a preliminary estimate, not the numbers that we're seeing tonight.
Okay,
His numbers were based on something that we received via email that showed different cost estimates.
okay. Did he not have a question? I know in several other discussions of the parking, there has arisen this comparison. I guess rule of thumb number is something like 3,500 or 4,000 per parking space, and this number is more like 7,000 or 8,000.
So it's a very complex site is my straight answer. We need to be sure we're managing the drainage properly. They have to be able, there's some slope issues that are gonna have to be addressed there. So again, it's a high-end estimate to make sure we're able to address anything that happens in that space. It could well come in under that, but Gail's trying to be sure we have room for any of the challenging factors on the
It's
site.
partially over the cap,
Right.
the proposed site for the parking lot. So that's also some of it, of exactly how we know that you can put parking on the cap. It's within the, what's they call it, the environmental agency puts together use agreement. Acceptable use agreement. But how you do that and properly drain, and there are going to be some real permitting issues with the town departments of addressing all that very carefully because it's near the drinking well and how much drainage is left in that retention, can go to the retention pond or you have to build a new one. There's a lot of that still is sort of to be determined when it's designed. And I think so again, I think it's aggressive, the numbers, so that we don't get caught short. And ideally, we, find that it's a lot less.
Any other questions on this article from? Okay. So then we are going to move on to the Concord Public Schools capital article.
Right, I just want to clarify, this is a portion of the town manager's capital article. It's our 900,000 that's been allocated to the schools. So I'm just clarifying that it's.
What?
Oh, we're trying to get the slides up, or the chart up there. So you have our 5-year capital plan. We worked hard over the last couple of months to update and really put a comprehensive plan together for all of the schools as well as Ripley, and to project out what our longer term and immediate needs were going to be. In really talking about the middle school this fall, we have needs that we feel are important to make it a better learning environment right now for the kids who are in their only middle school years. A building, if it were to happen, isn't going to do them anything different than the 3 years they're there now. So we've targeted some money towards that. We are in desperate overdue need of a district-wide phone system because the one we have doesn't work reliably. And we've added a little bit in for some security updates at two of the elementary schools and middle school to just improve the security camera access and to feel like we've brought it somewhat into 2019 in terms of our capacity there. So that's the 900,000 for this year. A little bit further, just because the bulk of the money is targeted to the middle schools. Some of it's based on the reconfiguration. You'll remember that in the fall, all of the 6th grade is going to Peabody and 7-8 to Sanborn. We've got a little bit of work to do to make sure that that will work as well as it has. A science lab is the big ticket item to make sure that the 8th grade has a full service lab on par with the one they had in Peabody. A little bit of classroom reconfiguration just to better use the spaces that are available at Sanborn, splitting spaces into smaller spaces, making an art room more the size of what an art room needs to be. Some work to that extent. And then some aesthetic work is also planned here to get some of the really horribly awful rugs out and put in things that are clean, and then to throw some paint on some walls. So that's the 900 for this year. And then I wasn't going to go through everything for the coming years. The big ticket items really are about heating and ERU work and things like that. Boilers at Ripley and at the elementary schools, we're in need of some upgrades there. We're taking the year to do some research on what's out there for grants and subsidies, especially where it's all going to be so much more energy saving. We want the year to see how low we can get those numbers, because they do add up to be substantial as we propose those upgrades. We're happy to answer anything there. This is part of the town.
The Article 7, 3.9 million.
Is that the, Carrie, do you know what article it's in?
It's our own article.
It's Article 12, but it's part of the town manager's capital budget. So let's say that accurately.
Oh, okay.
Sorry if I said it wrong.
It's a separate
Yeah, sorry if I
article.
said it wrong.
It's Article 12.
The last thing I'll mention, we always put 50,000 aside for each of the middle schools for the, we don't know what could go wrong mode. So 100,000 of the 900,000 is just for contingency for whatever issues happen.
So with the planned reconfiguration at the middle school, where will the modulars be, and what do you expect?
They're going to stay right where they are.
So
Yeah, they are.
Still, so with 7 and 8 in Sanborn, all those modulars end up
Yes.
at Sanborn.
Yes, yes.
And the Case Collaborative, I thought there was some issue with that
So,
program. What's
yeah.
going on with that?
I've been in extensive conversations with Case. Actually, just today, their biggest need initially that didn't allow for just a quick, simple move over to Peabody. We have room at Peabody. Is the inclusion of those kids in their 7th or 8th grade classrooms. So actually, the executive director was with Justin today and went into Peabody, and what we've been able to show them is that there's the family consumer science room available in a big music space. And I think they're going to be re-looking at whether the inclusion program is the best fit, or if one of their life skill programs is a better fit to the space we have available. She got quite excited, actually, to see what was. So we're trying to still service their needs. We're active, and I sit on the board there. We try to make sure that we're accommodating for them too. We value their presence and are hopeful that's all going to pan out to be a win-win.
Thanks.
Yeah, no, good question.
Lori, I just have a quick general question.
Sure.
We're talking about middle school. Has any thought been given to what to do with Peabody?
Good question. Yeah, I believe we're going to be giving that to the town for discussion. We don't have a need for Peabody in the schools, so that will be a town discussion. So there's an asset to consider in the mix.
So is it likely then that the schools would basically transfer school land and a building over to the town and say, do what you think might
I'm
be
hoping the people around me are shaking their heads yes, but
They
I would
seem to
expect
be,
that is the case.
I think that technically what has to happen is that the school committee votes to surplus it to the town.
surplus the
Yes.
land.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then it's a town decision as to, what the needs are.
It's a good question.
Did Phil have any other questions that he?
Not about the capital, no.
No. Okay. Any other questions from the committee? Now, before we set you free, did Phil have any other questions of any nature?
He had questions about the budget, the CPS budget.
Well, I think.
Are we talking about that next week or?
No.
No?
This is our crack.
This is a whole enchilada.
Here are the questions.
Your computer.
We're talking about the CPS budget here,
Yes.
right? Is the school administration planning to hire 3 new assistant principals at Alcott, Thoreau, and Willard?
So we started a conversation. At the last meeting, I asked permission to begin exploring the option of using current attrition opportunities. We have retirements of 2 of the 3 schools to explore some reconfiguration with the possibility of assistant principals at each school, cost neutral. And the reason we're looking at that is multiple-fold. One is the evaluation demands and supervision of teacher demands on the elementary principals. They're the only evaluators in their schools for all staff of all kinds, and it makes it very ineffective. They are also serving as team chairperson for the special ed side of the house, which is also another very demanding. I've never seen elementary schools where the principals are the solo team chairs, plus all of the other principal work, hoping they get to instructional leadership, which is supposed to be their main mission. So we're looking at reallocating, another reorganizational idea. It's in its very, very early stages. I asked permission to explore the option a week ago, so there's no definitive outcome here yet.
Well, let me ask, what's in the budget?
The budget is right now for specialists at each school. We have 4 at each: math, reading, literacy, and technology. The opportunity would be 1 at each school would shift into an assistant principalship.
So the rules
So
might change. Same.
It's a shift of cost to an administrative side.
Okay.
But there's a lot to play out in that. So I caution to say we're in the exploratory phase for sure. There's a lot to look at and talk about.
I have a procedural question. When do we talk about the guideline again? When do we next, because we're not in agreement on as far as spending relative to the guideline, are we?
Someone else can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we're done on that. I think. Right?
Probably one more time.
We will have one more discussion and vote internally.
Okay.
We said. Okay, thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Very valuable session.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay. All right. Well, let's see. While people are moving about, we could deal with our minutes. We have one set of minutes in front of us, minutes for our meeting of the 10th of January. I have some comments. Does anyone?
I have some comments.
Mary?
I'm waiting for Anita.
Forge ahead.
I'm waiting for Anita.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So I'm looking at the minutes on page 4, in the middle of the page where we're talking about the 3 articles for affordable housing development. And the very last sentence where it says, with 50 to 90 home sales per year in Concord, averaging $720,000 each, the estimated income from this surcharge would be about $400,000. There are 2 things I'd like to change there. Number 1, we're not talking about the surcharge now, we're talking about the real estate transfer tax. So this estimate of how much revenue is really, instead of surcharge, it should say transfer tax.
Okay.
And also the amount should be between $360,000 to $650,000 if you did the math. 350, 360, sorry, to 650.
To 650. From the difference between 50 and 90.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, exactly. So it'd be a range. And then the other thing, which is really a nit I have, which is page 2 at the top. It says the Finance Committee thanked Ms. Reed for coming, and she left the meeting at 7:15. In fact, Carlin stayed until the end of the meeting.
Right. Okay.
Thank you.
And she actually spoke later.
She did.
Right. Okay.
I'll move.
No, I've got a few more comments. On page 2, just about in the middle of the page, there is a paragraph that says, in anticipation of the meeting with the school committee on January 17th. I don't fully understand this in taking both sentences together. Is it clear?
Well, my sense of that was that we were gonna, you started out ready to go article by article, trying to assign people and get everybody on the, get everybody signed up to talk or do whatever. And I was trying to say, let's just focus on the high interest, we'll call them the high interest articles, right, that were school committee related. So that was kind of my intention.
I see. Okay, so this is broader than what you're saying, you're correcting me about order of process, which
I
deserve the correction.
Nudging.
Yeah, I was dead wrong. I was actually misreading the agenda.
So we
we
had started out with a certain direction, and then we backed off on that. You were going to walk through the articles, get everybody signed up, and we just changed the way we were going to take it.
All right. Also on this page, in the next paragraph, there's an underlined phrase, new middle school, and then a new sentence that begins, in preparation for that, the school committee is planning to engage with the community. I would suggest that we drop the quotation marks around engage, and we say just because I don't want there to be any hint of snarkiness. And continue after that phrase with the community, and say through a series of tours, coffees, and public meetings.
Thank you for cleaning
On page 3 at the top, the first paragraph beginning, in response to a question, Mr. McCain. I think in the interest of future readers, I mean, who knows 20 years from now who's reading this, I would say rather than Mr. McCain, I would say Select Board Chair McCain, just so people understand who it was who was speaking.
In the first page, he was listed with his title.
Oh, is he elsewhere?
Yes, title is noted.
Under his present.
All right, thank you. I'm glad you caught that. In the second to last paragraph in that page, at the January 17th meeting, for clarity, I would suggest we take that phrase and put it after Mr. Swain suggested that, comma, at the January 17th meeting. The SCB asked. In the last paragraph, it ends with a sentence, the municipal capital project, $3,950,000, will be discussed with, shouldn't that be a separate paragraph, that sentence? It doesn't really seem to fit with the paragraph.
Could be. I was trying to keep it to 5 pages.
Okay.
But, yeah, it would be, I could put it separate.
You have plenty of white
I
space
do
on
have
page
space on
5.
page
Yeah, right.
five.
Right,
At that point, I
exactly.
think I was trying to keep it to 4 pages.
Speak the font small.
I was.
You lost.
Am I, you're raked over the coals for
No,
something?
no, you're fine.
And then on page 4, the second paragraph, sustainable growth rate, the last 2 words, and calculated, I would delete those because we haven't talked about explaining in the explanatory box how we're going to calculate it. And that's it for me. So now, I will accept the motion. And a second. All right, all in favor? Okay, unanimously accepted. Good. So now we're to the talking about other articles as needed. Anyone have any particular articles that they would like to bring up for further discussion at this point?
We have the town manager coming in on the 24th.
We do.
So we can defer this back to all items. What else do we have?
I noticed that the 3 articles on affordable housing are now under both the Finance Committee and the Select Board public hearing calendars.
Yes, that's right. That, we had discussed that.
We had asked
right.
for that, yes.
And they made that. So if no one else has anything, Article 19, which is our article, the Finance Committee bylaw change, just wanted to discuss a little bit a conversation I had with a member of the public who was quizzing me pretty closely on why we need this change to the bylaw. And he asked some very, I think, worthwhile questions that point out the need to develop some more information. Most pointedly, he asked 2 questions. One, if we look at the Randall curve for Concord, as you see our 46% growth over however many years it is, 11 years. And we look at the same curve for our peer towns. Are their curves radically different? Do they have the same slope as ours, or are they lower, or are they higher? And if all of our peer towns have the same Randall curve slope, does that not mean that we don't have a problem? That was his question. And I, put that out for you to think about.
We all have a problem.
I think it's an
Okay.
interesting thing to know, but I don't think that means.
Okay.
So we actually discussed that last year at the Fiscal Sustainability Working Group and had some data on all surrounding towns, and it was broadly comparable.
Okay.
I mean, I could resurrect the data if you wanted to see.
I think
But it's true, what he said is true.
So it is true.
It's true.
Yeah,
it
and
behooves
also-
us to resurrect those data and have them ready for town meeting, because someone is going to ask that question, and I think we need to be able to answer it.
So Concord distinguishes itself in many ways, and this can be another one.
No, wait, I was understanding, I thought we were all showing the Randall curve. I thought we were all doing the same thing. We're not distinguished.
We can distinguish ourselves.
In other words, we can
No,
distinguish
right,
ourselves by
right,
containing it.
By being different.
To be different.
So his second question was, what is the ratio between, or what has been the ratio between the median household income and the median tax bill? And if it has remained relatively constant.
Well, no, because in the Randall curve, we had the assessed property values in one of those curves, I think I have it, where the median household tax bills increased at twice the rate of virtually everything else we could measure.
But not income.
We don't know.
Well, we couldn't find the income
Right.
by the quintiles that we wanted.
We don't know it.
Yeah.
That's true, but but it did increase at twice the rate of, a broader measure of wage growth for the region. Okay, but to answer your question, one of those lines, his question, was assessed
Which is a
property
good one.
values, and the median household tax bill increased also at twice the rate of assessed values of property.
Oh.
Remember?
I do.
Okay.
I do.
I think that was his question.
No, I don't think it does.
More of an income question. This was how's the tax bill going up as a percentage of
The problem when you show wages is that people will say, well, most people in Concord aren't wage earners. I mean, that doesn't reflect the
Well, nobody said anything about wages.
Oh, but that's what we have. That's what I'm
That
saying.
may be what we have, but his question was, what is the ratio between median household income?
I understand, but I'm just saying, if we think that wages would be a proxy for income, I think we would get.
Oh, I wouldn't think that.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
It's not.
And I'm not sure, I mean, I think one of the things we're trying to do, I mean, if household incomes are going up steeply, because Concord is becoming really a home for the 1%, I think that's one of the things we're trying to mitigate.
So I agree with you, but I think we have to be able to address this question because it's going to come up.
So we have that data. We know what the median household income is every year.
median.
We do?
Median, yes.
I thought we had the
Median.
median, we had the average, we get averages, but which is not the median.
Well,
I think
median should
median
be-
is a hard number.
I think we have median for Concord.
How do we get that?
We have it, it's well published.
Well, it's in clear.gov, in cleargov.com for recent years, but I could not find anything beyond sort of 2014 for median household income for Concord.
So maybe we were using average household income?
I don't know what we were using.
We were really having a very tough time with that. But the one factoid that we know with certainty is that 35% of our homeowners are housing burdened. And that's a statistic from the.
This is an important
And
fact.
so,
So how do we know that?
that-
Where did that
That
come
comes
from?
from
The Fed.
Yeah,
The Fed?
yeah, it's called the American something survey.
Community survey.
The Federal Reserve Bank of Boston was the source of the data,
Okay.
and they look at this, and we could tease out renters versus owners. And it was at the owner level that we were housing burdened, and we were more burdened than peers.
Meaning that a larger percentage of income was going to pay mortgage, was that what they meant?
Hey, household costs, it's an all-in cost.
Remortgage your taxes, your utility.
Okay.
Tom?
And we could reconstruct that.
Andrea?
Am I mistaken, or have we also been talking about an aging population?
Well, we have.
Growing?
We have noted that, yes, and.
As a percentage?
Fairly rapidly, but.
Which isn't
I
the,
don't think we've linked that to income necessarily or to housing burden. It may be true, but I don't think we've found a statistical link that we
They were
can.
not distinguishing. The
age.
housing burden information did not distinguish and provide a breakout by age bracket.
Right.
After last week's
Could
meeting,
you speak right into that thing?
after last week's meeting, Tom McKean had also pulled me aside and said that he didn't think using the 10-year treasury bond was a good measure. He was proposing the growth rate in town revenue as a measure
Well,
that's
That's a good point. That's something.
Excel would not be able to process that.
just the
Increase taxes more. Lower percentage, but increase taxes more.
so be prepared for a question
I
like
think that, because this is something this person mentioned also, that at the very least, we ought to factor in new growth somehow in our projection. And I don't know how to tackle that. I don't know how to get a handle on what likely new growth is going to be over, beyond a couple of months. But I think his point was also a good one, that if you've got 3% growth in revenue due to new growth, how can you limit your revenue growth to 2.77%, which is what it would be if we were suggesting the yield rate on the 10-year.
But
No.
Tom, didn't we look into that last year, and we looked at new growth, and it was, I thought it was 1.7. Does that ring a bell? June, do you remember?
I don't remember the number, but we knew
We
that
had
it was
blips
slow.
because of
We
like
knew
things
it was
like
slowing
the
down.
use. and-
Carrie could probably.
Yeah, we
find
should
it.
Yeah,
have that,
Carrie.
yeah.
She knows all.
It looks like,
Well,
The new growth comes in after the fact, so saying that
That's
the
right.
target on the existing base is a certain number.
Right.
Then the
So-
new growth becomes a happy surprise, it doesn't take away the need to come up with an
It's not,
advisory number
Right.
on
Well-
keeping what we're doing on the existing base,
right, that's what it was.
growing at a rate that's sustainable.
So-
and it's lumpy, it's not smooth.
we have, I think on, is it February 11th, our public hearing when we will be discussing Article 19?
I think it's 18.
Article 18.
It's 18, yeah.
18.
Well, it's, I think it's 19 now in the new, is it not?
Looks like
Well,
18.
once you get
Was it
to
18?
19.
Okay, it's been moving around over the last couple of weeks. But,
Yeah.
it's
18, this one anyway.
It's either the 11th.
It is 18,
It's
okay.
either the 11th or the 25th. I don't think we've said specifically which date.
Well, let's
that
make it the
will come.
25th then.
Okay, it's the 25th.
Just to give us a little more time. You know, I think we need to be fairly polished at the public hearing when we present about Article 18 in order to both answer questions we've already heard from the public and hopefully garner support from the people who attend the hearing, all 4 of them. So.
All 40 select board members.
All right, that's all I had to say. I'm begging you all to be sort of keeping thinking about Article 18 and how best we're going to present. In terms of presenting at town meeting, I spoke to the moderator on Wednesday morning, and we're going to be given 8 minutes for our presentation. So
That's luxurious.
Yeah.
Good.
Does she have that all mapped out? Who-
no, she asked me how much I wanted, and I asked for 12, and she said we could have 8.
As far as town meeting process goes, I heard today at a different gathering that I was at, that there might be electronic voting at town meeting.
On the second night of town meeting, there will be a test of electronic voting. And it will be using a smartphone-based app that will be written up in the journal and also in the Finance Committee report so that people can download the app in advance of town meeting. And there will be folks at town meeting to instruct those of us who are digitally challenged on how to use it best.
And it won't apply to all of the warrants. It'll only be, I believe, for a few select warrant articles that are considered by the moderator not controversial.
Right.
But you have to still be present.
Yes.
You must be in the room, actually.
Yeah,
and,
the devices have a
Somehow
range, so
controls
you have
whether, like, you can't just leave the room because you're on the internet.
Okay.
It's a
That's what I was worried
system that has been in use in other towns. I think
Wayland uses
has been using it for some time. And
Is there an option for somebody who does not have a smartphone? Or is that not an option?
as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, you will be, if you don't have a smartphone, you will be sitting in a special section.
Someone knows something.
iPads, remember? iPads they're gonna have.
Oh, they're going to hand out some iPads.
Right.
Oh, okay.
And so, in order to, the authentication, this is really kind of interesting, the authentication will be done, but when you sign in, instead of getting your goldenrod ballot, you will get a small certificate that has one of those
QR code.
barcodes on it, or QR code, and you will scan that with your phone, and that will enable your phone to authenticate you as the person.
What will they think of next?
Well, I'll tell you what. I'll tell you what they'll think of next. So we are also going to experiment with emailed in questions during town meeting. So people who are watching at home with proper authentication will be able to email questions to both the moderator and chairs of certain committees. And those questions, everything will be filtered through the moderator.
We tried that last year. Did we try that?
I don't know.
The hearings.
At the hearings.
The hearings, okay, the hearings.
So, all right, anyone have any other articles about which they want to have discussion, or shall we?
Can I ask a question? Will we discuss as a committee the 3 articles on affordable housing before the hearings, or do we want to wait until the hearings and then discuss them as a committee? What do you think is the right thing?
I think it's going to be after the hearings.
Okay.
Yeah. So, any new business? Any citizen comments?
I should have brought this up earlier, but, so I'm still a little confused.
Could you please identify
Oh,
yourself?
sure, excuse me.
Even
Cynthia
though we all
Rainey,
know who
80
you are.
Hunter's Ridge Road.
Pull a microphone over next to her. Okay. Or two.
So back to the feasibility study. And I think this is what Mr. Banfield was trying to get at a little while ago. The money will be expended under the direction of the school committee, so not under the town manager. And I find that to be confusing.
I wish I had asked you for comment while the...
Well, I think you did, I just didn't think of it. And so I think that's where a little bit of the, who would form the building committee?
Well, I see that as separate and distinct from the feasibility study, but...
Right.
They were telling us that they got.
Mr. Grom, do you have any comment?
Robert Grom, Mildred Circle, Chair of the Regional School Committee. I've done some reading on this, and the building committee, if it is a town project, is going to be established under the auspices of the select board.
So, right, and how does this relate to the feasibility study?
That's actually an unresolved question as far as I'm concerned. I have no idea what the answer is.
Oh.
And it's a good question.
Because...
And it should be resolved.
Will it be resolved at your meeting next Tuesday?
I can at least try to get an answer by that time. If not, we might not have that answer, but I'll work on that.
Okay.
So I guess to put a finer point on it, the first thing that seemed to be described was we have to contract with an owner's project manager or a clerk of the works, one or the other, depending on how big the project is, and I think this is big enough for the owner's project manager status person. And then that person starts to become the driver behind the formation of whatever that committee is that is going to drive the feasibility study process.
Wait a minute, I thought the building committee was going to be doing
The building
that. Permanent building committee.
Well, that doesn't exist yet, but somehow that owner project manager has to get hired. So so
we're going to have another building committee before we have the permanent building committee?
No, I don't know what we're going to have. That's a fine question, Carl. But the article will get funding passed, and then you can start the process of. This is how I understood the conversation this evening. You can then start the process of building that box, which has district personnel and construction professionals in it. But that is going to be, my understanding is it's a town building. It's under the select board, and the district will, the Concord Public Schools will have membership in that process, or that, whatever that is, but it's going to be run by them, I believe.
So who would hire the OPM, for example?
It feels to me like that would flow out of the select board through the town manager.
Yeah, so, well, the article is saying building committee, so that's something that's directly in
Okay.
Oh, really?
So how did it work for Willard?
So
That's what I was gonna suggest.
it's going back a ways, but as I recall, you had the feasibility study that worked on some general ideas and plans and gathered information, and that was school-led. And then the schools worked on hiring an architect. And I'm trying to remember if the town was involved in that. The town manager is heavily involved in the process, and he is absolutely part of, and there are other stipulations in terms of town members that have to be on the building committee, at least if you're doing it at MSBA, and I would assume we'd follow that anyway. So for the building committee, which takes over the actual building and hires the OPM and all that, that's going to be run by the town building committee.
Okay.
It's how would we, what I can't quite remember is getting to that point. I think that's where the schools are involved in the feasibility and getting the initial stuff done.
So John and Dean and others who have attended, and Bob, who've attended all the school committee meetings and more than I have, I seem to recall that when Heather made the presentation, either last week, I think, it included the creation of a timeline. And I think that's what we're really asking for. And if that could be expanded so that the timeline detailed what entities would be involved at each stage, I think that would be a benefit.
Who is the
go a long way
first
to answering your question.
Who's spending the money?
The town, and I think that this is a shift, that the last project was a regional project and the region ran it. All three other buildings were run very successfully by the town, and it is a town, it's town property, it's a town project, and I would hope that we would have a conversation about the needs in the context of what are the other town needs while we're doing this, and this, because it's a town property, it's not just the bailiwick of the schools and their desires. It's,
okay.
You know, very differently titled.
Thank you. Excellent question. Thank you, Mr. Grom. Well, if there...
I was just going to ask one, perhaps of Kerry, I guess. We were shown a chart of debt service retirement of the past projects, and we know there are several town projects that are sort of ghosts out there in the fog. But we know, some approximation of what the cost. I mean, it's the town manager. Is there a way of adding those to this? To have a town done chart like this, and of adding those, so we can kind of not be talking about in the fog so much.
There certainly is a way to do it, and it's most easily done when the estimated costs for those projects are talked about. I mean, at this point, I haven't seen or heard anything even remotely definitive about what those are. I know there's a CPW campus project, a public safety building project, municipal offices, but there really hasn't been any discussion about what the costs are. I think Dr. Hunter mentioned that the town is doing a feasibility study, and that is underway, and the first draft of that is due out within the next few weeks, and so perhaps the town manager can talk about that. So as soon as there are some costs identified, even ballpark, it's very easy to put that on top of that chart.
Carrie, would explain what you just said. Did you say that Dr. Hunter alluded to?
I think she mentioned in her presentation the municipal building feasibility study.
Okay, so some of these projects may penetrate the 5-year horizon be closer than 5 years away.
I would think both the police chief and the fire chief and the CPW director would be hopeful that they would be sooner than.
So I think we ought to, and maybe you've already decided to do this, but I think that we ought to be using some assumed numbers, no matter, even if they're off by 30%, in our 5-year projection.
CPW was 16 to 17 million the last I heard.
What I have heard, but I've seen nothing, is 20 to 25 million dollars for each of those, each project.
It's important, and it's important even in the short run, because if we're gonna take on a middle school building without any support from the Commonwealth, then decisions even on staffing and other things that we're looking at adding into the operating budget need to be looked at in the context of that we're potentially absorbing an awful lot of capital projects, and this is the time to change staffing. There is a much more complex set of questions, and that it would be a good time to step back and try to look at the bigger, broader picture than each project discreetly, because as Scott is fond of pointing out, each project of its own, each proposed add of a personnel head is great. They're fantastic creative ideas, but we need to look at the whole impact, and this is an awful lot of construction with no support from the Commonwealth, and that's going to hit all the taxpayers in the pocketbook. And we need to have collaboration between the school committee, the select board, the finance committee, and other entities in prioritizing which needs to come first, right? And I don't have an answer for that, but I hope that we can have a robust conversation about that.
Robust.
So since Carrie's...
It's Concord, so...
Yeah.
by
definition robust, it's Concord.
And it's not a tonight thing, but that we need to look at the whole big picture.
Right.
Yes. Collaboratively.
Right.
Yep. And
So was that going to be built in to our 5-year projection?
I think I'm waiting for something a little more definitive than what I've heard so far. I will talk to the town manager about it. We certainly, if he wants to go with those numbers for now, we can put something together for your meeting next week.
I wasn't talking about putting it into our 5-year projection, because that's been pretty consistent in not putting these things in, but I think it's something that when we're discussing a $90 million project and then another 20 million, whatever, that these are things that we should know about.
So Carl,
maybe we should decide to put it into our 5-year, but at this point, that's a whole,
I vote for putting it in.
Absolutely.
Because, like, that's the most significant numbers of all. Like, that drives everything else, right? And even if they're strong, I think that's okay. But, because you have to pick a number, and you have to pick a payment schedule, and you have to make some assumption about interest rate. But projection is a projection, right? And then, because I think it alerts the town to these are the big things on the horizon, and these are really going to drive your overall tax rates.
And I was hoping to see these things.
Just to see them, and then, because what you really want to do is then say, okay, or have, I would think the town would say, okay, I want, these are the numbers, and here's a guess, but look how they add up, and I want to slide this out and this back, or this, or, right? But at least it's I think having a number is better than having no number.
Sure.
Right.
It affects other choices.
It affects the context, right?
Right.
It affects the context.
But I thought what you were saying, Carlos, you wanted to see it on that particular graph that the school
Right, yeah. And then we can sort of say, whoa, we really should put this into the 5-year or something else.
So
I think that's a whole separate question.
It's a good idea, but you were talking about, if we're going to show a graph,
what is
which
this
looks like debt's
really
falling off.
Well, that's debt service.
Let's put all the debt in there.
You can't cherry pick it.
You can't just show this little bit of debt's falling off the cliff when in fact you've got all this other
Well,
stuff.
the question to Laurie, right, which
is
is
built is going to be gone.
that's my question to Laurie. Like, look how great it falls off. Okay, where's yours? Where's yours? Because it's not falling off, right? Where's your increase, right? And so then, I totally support.
This problem.
You're right. Let's start
Say,
right
hey,
here.
look how great we are. Well,
Let's put in these other
where's your 90? How's
Isn't that what you're going?
Yes.
Yeah. So the 5-year plan is great for the people who read that, but we're going to probably see a graph up when we're talking about the middle school that has this.
Just the debt service.
And so we want to make
Just
sure.
so we're clear.
Yeah.
I'm proposing that the 5-year plan, 5-year projection should include that.
No, I think
Yes.
that's a great idea.
That's another question. That's another subject.
It's another process. You need to understand what's coming down the pike. But I thought what you were
I was
saying.
asking for something very, very simple.
That-
Maybe when we see that, that will open up that question.
Otherwise, it's fictional. If you don't include it in a 5-year, it's like, well, this is what your rate would be, but the big stuff is left out. It's like, right?
Carl, you just want to see
It's off balance.
this chart be all the excluded debt that we
Yes,
have.
yes, like this solid line and a bunch of twisted lines.
So
I think that's a great idea.
Carrie needs a clear instruction from us.
You want to make a motion?
I'm clear.
You're clear? Well,
I'm clear. I think you would like to see that one graph
yes,
updated to include debt service.
yes.
And the other thing that we were going to talk about is the beginning of the 5-year forecast next week. And so I'll have those two things together.
Cool.
And if you want to move the debt service into the 5-year forecast, we can talk about doing that.
So I have a probably somewhat silly question about our debt service, this line that's going down. When we issue bonds to build these buildings, are these level payments for the life of the bond? And so therefore, if we're paying, maybe 2 or 3 tranches for the high school, those are all level payment until they all are extinguished, or are they declining payments? In other words,
Under state law, the only projects that you can finance level payment are school projects. Municipal projects cannot be financed that way. And I don't believe any of our school projects are financed that way. They're level principal.
Level principal.
Not
Okay.
level
That's why we
payment.
have this constant decline. Okay, I just needed to know what the schedule process is. Okay.
So the interest is variable? I need an education, like, I'll get educated.
You pay off the same amount of principal every year, so
You have the same amount of
it's different
principal
than
every year,
mortgage.
but that means you have less interest every year.
It's different than mortgage.
So
right?
it's
So you pay
level
different from
principal
mortgage.
versus level payment. Mortgage, the mortgage you pay is level payment.
Right, right.
Mostly interest in the beginning.
Right.
Yes.
But when you borrow money, don't you say you say this is the coupon, and the coupon remains constant.
It does, but the principal's changing, the principal's dropping after repayment, right?
But the cash out remains the same.
Yeah,
For mortgage, but not here.
For mortgage, but not.
But not
Oh.
here. Here, you pay the same.
Oh, okay, I need to.
So, everybody can scream at me that this horse is dead and I should stop beating it, but I'm not satisfied that it's dead. I'm hearing that we're going to have a debt service curve that's going to include all of our existing obligations and the probable future obligations along the lines that Carl was describing. But what I'm not clear about is whether that's going to be included in our 5-year tax burden projection. And if what you're saying is there'll be a switch so that we can either include it or not include it, and we can look at a curve either way, that's fine. But I think creating that curve and not putting it in the 5-year tax projection is disingenuous at best and maybe straight out, misleading to the taxpayers.
So the difficulty that I'm having is I haven't heard any discussion of any timetable for any of the municipal projects. So it's
what people?
difficult,
Timetable.
the timetable for any of these
Okay,
municipal
okay,
projects. So
yep.
I don't feel that I'm in the position
okay.
to say when these projects are going to happen. So I will have a conversation with the town manager and ask him what he thinks the probable time frame is for these projects. And it may be that none of the municipal side falls within the next 5 years.
Okay.
So maybe what we could have a basically, too bad they can't be transparent, but a curve for each project, and then we can kind of see.
I certainly can give you, our debt service goes out to, say, 2030. We can look at a picture out to 2030.
Anything that's, it seems like anything that's firm and committed should be above the line. Separately, you could certainly have a schedule below the line of CapEx and projected timing, right? And then it has a schedule below the line, and then you could add that in if you write. So a user can pick, in theory, pick and choose and say, okay, if these are, these are the projects, here's the impact they would have, just to see the magnitude, right? Because it's certainly the reality that's booked and actual that's one part. And then it's just a best guess of, so for instance, we could guess on the middle school. Is it going to be funded? Is it not going to be funded? When? So then, but at least below the line, you could have a straw man of, okay, here's a guess. Here's a guess on cost. Here's a guess on timing based on town manager or based on needs or based on whatever. And then people could play with, nobody will, but you could play, forward or back and change the amount. And if you sum all those up, you can then say, how does that relate to up above, right? And then you can get your ta-da big total. So I think it's worthwhile to show the town these are the things that aren't exactly booked, but a guess. And that way you can at least, that way you have, as opposed to, you can't see them at all, right?
How we would do that, I'm not clear.
Yeah. But it's just a schedule. It's just it's a number and when it starts and a guess on the term. You can guess it, right? And then it's just a question of amount and when or if.
Don't we keep it at about 5 to 7% of the budget? $6 billion. The capital.
The annual debt.
Yeah. So if you had that curve out there, then people would be able to say, okay, we can afford to do $6 million.
I can't hear you, and Mark in there has told me if I can't hear you, he can't hear you, and then the audience can't hear you. So
I was just asking Carrie, we do like 5 to 7% of the budget is debt service. So if you just project that level out, that would give you a rough how many millions of dollars you have available, and that would say, okay, then based on that, here are the projects. This is the amount of project building we can afford to do.
So we already have the annual plan programmed out at least 5 years. All of these items that we're talking about would be outside of that.
Right. Meaning that there isn't capacity for them?
In addition to
it. It would be in addition.
These are they're like exceptional, we'll just call it exceptional.
Right, so the annual debt plan is $5 million a year. There's no way you can fit any of what we're talking about into that plan. Or you could fit a very small portion of a project. I mean, you just couldn't make that happen.
And that $5 million will be spent on other things, probably.
Yeah. The $5 million is more like maintenance of smaller.
It's refresh. The land purchase.
It's refresh as opposed to kind of a special.
The other thing is that this graph won't include other types of things that we vote at town meeting to fund with debt, like land or ponds or things like that, right?
Affordable housing.
Or affordable housing, or all the other little things that add up, right?
Anything that falls in that $5 million or so a year that's part of the annual plan would be already baked into the budget, the debt service baked into the budget. So the 5-year forecast is already going to account for that.
Really?
That's part of the town manager's budget.
Yes.
So when we decided to buy, for example, the Giroux property.
That's
a separate article.
That's outside it.
It's outside
Right.
the plan.
So in addition to these looming large capital projects.
In addition to the $5 million.
We could find out that
there's the Bald property that we bought a few years ago.
Something.
The White Pond, the Giroux, all these other little things that we add. Okay. That we've done. What else did we do? We did $1.5 million for IT a few years ago. So I don't think that was.
It was not borrowed.
that we used.
That wasn't borrowed?
We used out of the kitty.
Okay, just pointing out that we.
No, but
we do.
People do need to understand that there are these looming large capital projects that need to happen and have a sense for how long they can be pushed out, and know that in the next 15 years that we need to build potentially a middle school, a public safety building, a CPW building, and whatever else we potentially have to do. And that the timing could slide around, but you can't go more than X years for any given building, and here's what's happening, which makes the Randall curve all the more important.
So what this encourages me to think about is if we ever have more money in free cash than we were really supposed to have, we should be putting it in a debt stabilization fund.
I agree.
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. For some sort of, in some sort
Something to
of.
trim off the top end of some of these
You
big
could
hits.
also have the concept of depreciation, right? You can start to have reserve reserve funds
Yes.
for significant buildings, because you know you're gonna have to rebuild. It shouldn't be this big lump, every time.
So
All the
it's-
schools
it's
being
just
done
a-
at the same
it's just a
time.
thought, we're-
That's something that would be set up by a town meeting.
Well, we may have a stabilization fund that was never totally extinguished or something that we could use. I don't know. Do we have any such
We have
accounts?
several stabilization funds. We don't have one called debt stabilization fund, but we have a general stabilization fund. And we do have a CPS building stabilization.
Okay.
Would it require a vote of a town meeting to allocate free cash to?
Yeah, we do. We'd have to.
Okay.
We'd have to.
Got it.
Well, actually, wouldn't it? Does that become part of the town manager's budget to put stuff in the stabilization fund, or is it? I'm trying to remember how Tony used to do this.
It would not be part of his budget.
Would not be part of
to
his
put
budget.
To put in.
So we would have a free cash article at town meeting to fund stabilization.
Yes.
Or to raise money, yes.
Carrie, do you have anything you would like to report on or bring before us this evening, or we'll be hearing from you as the finance director's report next week?
Next week.
Okay, great. So, if there's no other business, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right, all those in favor? Please leave.
Right, now that I have you here.